Hey, so welcome back to the channel. I was thinking about my next video and thought that this one was long overdue just in general. So I decided to make something that most people have been requesting or just been wanting to know, which is a how to play Gaia video. This is just a comprehensive video on how to play Gaia and won't really cover any matchups or advanced strategies. But with that out of the way, let's get into it. You might hear some background noise or like some random noises. That's just my family doing their thing. I can't really stop them. But yeah. Anyways, let's get into it. Before we dive into the how-to, we need to establish the main cards that will be used in Gaia. As of the recording of this video, it is post Phantom Dragon Aeon, which is VBT 10. If you still don't know which set this is a set that Gaia released in. First off, in our list of cards for Gaia, we're going to be looking at Wave 1 of support. The cards that you need in this set are Archbird, Lacerate Rex, and Mega Rex. Archbird is our draw PG, Lacerate Rex is our free gauger, and Mega Rex is our retire unit. What Lacerate Rex does is that on place from hand, you can gauge it using the top card of your deck, and when it's retired through any means, you can Soul Blast one and bring one of its gauges back to your hand. And what Mega Rex does is that on attack, Vanguard or Rearguard, you can kill one of your Rearguards, and then you can draw a card. If the unit is on Rearguard, however, you can choose a Counterblast 1 to gauge Mega Rex, and then it gets +5 for each gauge until end of battle. Lacer Rex is a nice utility card to get any combo pieces that you might need or any extra shield in your hand, and Mega Rex is there for the retire and for the hand advantage. As for Wave 2 as support, there isn't really much that you would use in the deck. The only thing I would really consider from Wave 2 is Sweeper out Crocanto and Polkenspine. Sweeper A Crocanto is a unit that gains 5k for each gauge, and Polkenspine acts as a source of countercharge and soul charge. Sweeper at Crocanto is a grade 2 that says on attack, once per turn you can choose to gauge this unit, and then it has a continuous ability that says this unit gets +5k for each gauge under this unit, and then if it has 3 or more gauge, it cannot be chosen by your opponent's skills, which is basically just resist. Polkenspine is a resource card that says when this card is retired from rearguard, depending on how many gauges, you can do these skills. If you have 1 gauge on the board, you soul charge 1. If you have 2 gauge on the board, you counter charge 1. And then if you have 3 gauge on the board, you can choose to move this unit's gauge to another unit. Note that it says on the board and not itself, so you do these skills based on how many are on the board, which in general is really easy to achieve. Wave 3 is where the bulk of the deck is. In Wave 3, you have a plethora of cards to obtain for the deck. Prison Bird, Blue Sprint, Regiodon, Dilophopyro, Terratherizino, and Gaia. I will go over the skills of all of these cards. Prison Bird's first skill is if any card has been gauged this turn, it gets +5k. And its second skill is the same as any other grade 3 searcher. Look at top 5, get up to 1 grade 3 into your hand, and if you did, discard a card. Blue Sprint is our other grade 1 that's been introduced in Phantom Dragon Aeon. Its skill is that on attack, Vanguard or Rearguard, you can choose to gauge one of your units, and when this card is retired due to a card effect, you can choose to call one of the gauges under it to Rearguard, and then if you do, you can choose to gauge that unit you called. So this basically extends Gaia plays and provides the called unit with power. Regiodon is the exact same thing as Blue Sprint, but a grade 2. Both of these cards, however, do have a hard once per turn, so if you get one copy with another, then you can't really pop them off. For example, I cannot do 2 Regiodons in 1 turn. I can do 1 Regiodon and 1 Blue Sprint, but nothing besides that. Dilophopyro is our new triple rare from this new set. Its skill is on Vanguard or Rearguard. When placed, you counterblast 1, you draw a card, and then you can call a card from your hand to Rearguard, and you can choose to gauge that card. This can combo in with Terratherizino or any grade 3 that you really want to call from your hand, or just anything that needs a gauge and you just don't feel like gauging it through other means. Or just something that can't get gauge in general. For example, like Prison Bird, that you can gauge it and just leave it in the back row to be a permanent 23k booster. Dilophopiro's second skill is when it's placed from gauge, it gets +10k until end of turn. So this card, if called off a gauge from Blue Sprint or Reshiram, is a very big card with the addition of Excel Circles and Gaia's skill. Paradorezino is our new rare grade 3 and honestly is almost our best grade 3 that's been revealed so far in contention with other secondary grade 3s. Its skill is basically the same as Mega Rex, but you don't get power. You can retire. So now our clan has Spot Retire. What its skill is on attack, Vanguard or Rearguard, you can choose to retire a Rearguard. If you do, you draw a card, and then if the card you retired had Gauge on it, you get to retire one of your opponent's Rearguards. This allows for many spot removal plays and lets you gain control of the board if there was some pesky Rearguard that was disturbing your gameplay. And finally, our boss card, Gaia. Its first skills get continuous. Every Rearguard with Gauge gets plus 5k during your turn, and if your opponent's Vanguard is at grade 3, they all get plus 10k instead. Its second skill is a on attack counterblast 1. You retire one of your Rearguards. It gets the original power of that Rearguard. If your opponent is at a grade 3 on Vanguard, then this unit also gets the original crit of that retired card. So not only does this apply power pressure, this card also applies crit pressure, which is very crucial to how the deck plays out. And finally, some honorable mentions. These cards are just meant to be used as text in the deck rather than being maxed out. These cards are just unique to each person's playstyle and whatever they think feels fine. We have 5 cards in the honorable mentions, which are Sonic Noah, Savage Raider, Sandalphilo, Smilodon, and Savage Mercenary. Noah is from Wave 1 of support and says on boost, it gives the unit that is boosting a gauge, and then on hit, that the battle it hit or boosted, you get to retire one of your other Rearguards and draw a card. So this card is more so for the early game than late game because this card is a mandatory gauge, which is why it's in the honorable mentions, and it needs to hit a bit of a downside. Savage Raider is our gauge manipulator. On plays, you can gauge one of your other Rearguards, and on attack, you can choose to move any amount of gauge from one unit to another unit. This card just tutors around gauge. If you ever have that problem of inconsistency, then this is the card that you'd want to run. Next, we have Sandalphilo, which is almost a clone of Savage Raider. Sandalphilo's skill is that when you can choose to rest this card. If you do, you can engage one of your Rearguards. Then, if you want to, you can counterblast one and give that unit plus 5. This really just gives gauge to anything. And if you need that spot gauge, then this is the card for you. Next, we have Turbo Smilodon, which is the most common grade 2 to pair with Sweeper or Acro Canto. This card basically enables Sweeper's plays right away as it is on place gauge and then on attack gauge. That's really the whole gist of this card. So if you really want to buff up your Sweeper, or you're thinking like, hey, grade 2 game with Smilodon and Sweeper is better in most cases, then go for it. Smilodon won't be run in most decks if they don't run Sweeper. So if a deck doesn't have Sweeper, a deck won't have Smilodon. And then finally, Savage Mercenary. Savage Mercenary is a 27k grade 3 with no gift marker that says if you don't have another unit in the same column as this unit that has a gauge, then this unit can attack. You can gauge it and attack with it. That is a ruling that has been passed. So if you gauge it, you can attack a Mercenary. This card is mostly there to buff up Gaia so that Gaia can actually hit numbers. So if Gaia retires Mercenary, it's a 37k attack with 2 crit. And if you boost with Prison Bird, that's 50k. Mercenary is really only there for the big body and nothing else. However, on a side note, this card doesn't provide a lot of consistency and really is just very inconsistent in the decks that I've seen that play Mercenary. So this is way more just a gimmick than a tech. This deck is a little different than of the previous 2 decks in Standard, which were the Gigarex and Angerblader deck. Gigarex focused more on hand advantage and big power, while Angerblader focused on spamming gauge on rearguards to buff them up and multi-attack with them. In the gist of these 2 decks, Gaia is in between these 2, gaining some hand advantage while making a lot of multi-attacks. What's different is that Gaia focuses more on spreading gauge out rather than stockpiling them onto 1 or 2 units. Gaia gives a fuel buff to the units that have 1 or more gauge on them, resulting in high power rearguards. With the addition of Blue Sprint and Reshiram in the mix, the cards that get called off those 2 cards also get the buff. The whole point of the deck is to overwhelm your opponent with multi-attacks while gaining hand advantage through Mega Rex and Terra the Rezino. This deck truly shines when you have 2 Excel circles. Not only do you get an extra attack, but both Blue Sprint and Regudon have their own circles for the cards they call, which result in less board management. This also enables for you to call out an extra beater in the freed up column. In combination with gauge boosters, your columns will be hitting for easily 30k plus numbers. I'll be going over each phase of the game and what those turns look like. These turns are just general setups and should not be used for higher level players. If you're going first on turn 1, your main right targets are going to be Prison Bird and any grade 1 that's not Lacerate Rex or Blue Sprint. You need Lacerate Rex for that possible filter and Blue Sprint for those multi-attack turns. If you're missing grade 2, you can call out your Lacerate Rexes to fish for one to ride next turn. But you do have to call something over it, which if you're playing against a retired clan, you might have to risk having it getting retired. Now, if you're going second on turn 1, your main right target is still going to be Prison Bird, or you're going to be on the aggressive side. Unless you have Dilophoal Pyro in hand and are planning on using it, call out a Lacerate Rex to a front row rearguard for an extra attack. If Prison Bird is on Vanguard, then its 5k skill procs off due to Lacerate Rex getting engaged from its own skill. If you end up riding Noah, do the same plays and hope that your Noah hits. Now for turn 2, whether you're going first or second, they kinda look the same. Your main right target is either going to be Dilophoal Pyro or Mega Rex. You want to avoid riding any other grade 2 unless you're setting up Sweeper with Regudon. Depending on the matchup, you'll either rush your opponent or gain hand advantage. One tip is not to call out a Mega Rex unless you have another one in hand. It is fine to ride Mega Rex if you only have one in hand, but it's not suggested to call out another one. The only time you call it a Mega Rex is if you're planning on retiring Regudon or Blue Sprint for multi-attacks, or if you have anything else to retire during that turn. The only time you call it either Regudon or Blue Sprint is if you can hit your opponent with just Regudon or Blue Sprint. You'll need a booster for the card that's going to be called off of Regudon or Blue Sprint, ideally Prison Bird to hit over triggers. You pull out 4 attacks on your opponent on turn 2, then set up for another 5 or 6 attacks on turn 3. Otherwise, your turn 2 will just be focused on hand advantage. Mega Rex with Lacerate Rex, Dilophoal Pyro into Terra the Rezino and Lacerate Rex. The only other play I'd make on turn 2 would be to ride Regudon, then call out Smilodon and Sweeper for a very strong and aggressive turn 2. For turn 3, this turn dictates whether or not you really just win the game, so play it carefully. Of course, you want your Vanguard to be Gaia. Get an Excel 2 gift marker usually, unless you have like a lot of combo pieces in your hand, then you can go Excel 1. Depending on your hand and what's in it, you're either going for hand advantage, multi-attacks, or a mix of the both. Even though it is Gaia's identity to multi-attack, you're not going to gain that much hand advantage from it. If you have Lacerate Rex, then play your cards to retire it. Unless you have 2 copies of each Regudon and Blue Sprint, there is honestly no reason for you to call out both of them on your first grade 3 turn. If both you and your opponent are on low damage, then it's a good time to rush them. You would call out both Regudon and Blue Sprint, and depending on the board, call out Terra the Rezino for retires or Mega Rex for the power. Make sure to plan out your column so that there is space for you to build a column out of the gauge calls from Regudon and Blue Sprint in case your opponent stacks triggers or if you get 2 triggers as gauge. If you are at high damage and your opponent is at low damage, then prioritize hand advantage. Make sure to control their field so that they can't rush you as hard the next turn. Key pieces here would be Mega Rex, Terra the Rezino, and Lacerate Rex. These are the cards that can generate your hand advantage and can be pretty beefy with Gaia's skill. To gain the most out of everything, it would be ideal if you retire Lacerate Rex with Terra the Rezino, then retire Terra the Rezino with Mega Rex, assuming that you don't have a second Lacerate Rex. You want to push a bit, but not too much to the point that your hand takes a toll. If you're at low damage and your opponent's at high damage, then absolutely rush them. This part is self-explanatory, just make sure that you're not lacking any guard since your opponent could kill you with a counter rush. If you and your opponent are at high damage, then strike a balance. You want to put enough pressure on them that it rips cards out of their hand, but you also want to be gaining hand advantage to counter their next turn. Unless you have a guaranteed kill, don't go all out for a rush turn. As for turn 4 and above, it's dependent on the matchup. Make sure to analyze the situation and the cards available to both you and your opponent to see whether or not you should rush out. It's all intuitive and match reliant from here. As for Excel 1 and when to use it, only use it when you have the best hand possible and you know you're going to kill them this turn. Gaia is a deck that relies on gauging the right cards while also managing resources to keep up with any counter rush. This deck can rush decently well and does a lot better with 2 Excel circles and gauges on the boosters. Column's getting a free 20k buff just because there is a gauge for both the attacker and booster is insanely strong, not to mention with multi-attacks as well. This deck has the potential to be insanely strong, but only in the right hands. You'd have to learn this deck inside out while also knowing every interaction and scenario to pilot this deck. You'd have to know what you can do with what cards and be able to play the optimal plays with the cards in hand. If you want to play this deck correctly, play tests like there's no tomorrow. Learn what you could have done better or analyze any misplays you did. Find what else you could have done in that scenario or any jank plays that would have gotten a different result. I'll link Different Fights video here because he explains it in depth a lot better. Anyways, that's the end of the video. I don't want to do any plugins for this video as it is a comprehensive guide. I know this is a little short for a comprehensive guide, but I just needed to get this out, and editing is going to take me a bit of time, which is why there was a 2-week wait on this video. Anyways, that's it for me. Hope you liked the video, and I will see you later.